The shadow beneath. It started as an ordinary summer. I had just moved into an old house, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by dense woods. The house, an inheritance from a distant relative, was more a mansion than a home, with its countless rooms and long, echoing hallways. It was during my exploration of these endless corridors and secret chambers that I first encountered the shadow beneath. It was subtle at first, a mere flicker in my peripheral vision, a darkness that seemed to slither along the edges of my sight. I would turn, expecting to catch a glimpse of a trick of the light, or perhaps a reflection, but there was nothing, only the heavy silence that seemed to saturate the air of the old mansion. As days turned into weeks, the presence of the shadow grew stronger, more assertive. It was no longer a mere flicker, but a palpable entity that stalked the fringes of my existence. I would wake in the dead of night to the feeling of being watched, the air in my room charged with a heavy, expectant energy. But whenever I turned on the lights, the room would be empty, save for the lingering sensation of an unseen observer. I tried to ignore it, to rationalize it as the product of an overactive imagination, fueled by the stress of the move and the loneliness of my new surroundings. But then, things began to disappear. Small things at first: keys, books, photographs, only to reappear in places I had never put them. And always, the shadow seemed to loom larger, a constant reminder of a presence that refused to be ignored. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I began to research the history of the house and my distant relative from whom I had inherited it. The local library held a collection of old newspapers and journals, and it was there, amidst the dusty pages of history, that I uncovered the truth. The house had been built by a man whose name was now lost to time, a reclusive and reportedly mad scientist who was obsessed with the boundary between life and death. He believed that shadows were not mere absences of light, but portals to another realm, a dark world that mirrored our own. His experiments, shrouded in secrecy and rumor, were said to be attempts to breach this barrier, to bring forth something from the shadow beneath. My relative, it seemed, had been the last in a long line of caretakers, tasked with ensuring that the house and its secrets remained undisturbed. But with their passing, the responsibility had unwittingly fallen to me. Armed with this knowledge, I realized that the shadow was not just a presence but a sentinel, a guardian of the threshold between worlds, and it was growing impatient. The disappearance and strange relocations of my belongings were not random acts but warnings, a message that I was disturbing the balance. Determined to end the nightmare, I scoured the house for any remnants of the scientist's work, hoping to find a way to banish the shadow. In the lowest level of the basement, behind a wall that seemed to have been built to conceal rather than support, I found it, a lab, untouched by time, filled with strange instruments and ancient tomes. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface swirling with a darkness that seemed to pulse with life. The shadow, no longer just a flicker at the edge of my sight, coalesced in front of the mirror, its form both terrifying and mesmerizing. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape, a formless void that stared back with unseen eyes. The air grew cold, and a voice, or what seemed like a voice, whispered from the depths of the mirror, speaking in a language I could not understand but felt deep within my bones. It was an invitation, a call to step through the barrier and join the shadow beneath. Fueled by a fear I cannot describe, I acted on instinct. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy, ancient tome, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, the dark swirling surface imploding with a sound like the world itself was being torn apart. And then silence. The shadow was gone. The oppressive feeling that had haunted the house lifted, replaced by a sense of peace I had not felt since moving in. In the weeks that followed, I repaired the basement wall, sealing away the remains of the lab and its secrets forever. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake to the feeling of being watched, and I wonder if the shadow beneath was truly banished, or if it simply retreated, waiting for the day when the barrier would once again be breached. The shadow within. The quaint town of Willow's End had always been my sanctuary, a place untouched by the chaos of the world. Also, I thought, until the summer of my 23rd year. That was when the shadows began to whisper, and I found myself caught in a mystery as old as the town itself. I'd returned to Willow's End to care for my ailing grandmother. Her home, a Victorian relic passed down through generations, sat on the edge of town, its back to the dense woods, that had always seemed to me a green sea of tranquility. But tranquility, I soon learned, can be a deceptive mask. The first night back, I was awoken by a sound unlike any I'd heard before, a low, incessant murmuring that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. It was as if the earth beneath the house breathed, and whispered secrets meant to stay buried. I attributed it to the stress of my return, and the weight of responsibility for my grandmother's care. Yet, the whispers did not cease. They grew only more insistent with each passing night. Curiosity, mingled with an unshakable sense of dread, drove me to investigate the woods behind the house. By daylight, the forest was, as I remembered, serene, majestic, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in golden beams. But as dusk approached, an unease took root within me. Shadows lengthened, morphing into shapes that seemed almost human. On the third day, compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I ventured deeper into the woods than ever before. There, hidden beneath a thicket of overgrown vines, I discovered an old well, its stones more scovered and worn. The air round it was colder, the whispers louder, and as I peered into its depths, I saw something move, a shadow, dark and fluid, unlike the static shadows cast by trees and stones. That night, the whispers grew to voices. Speaking a language I couldn't comprehend, I lay in bed, frozen with fear, as the voices seemed to converge beneath my room. In a moment of reckless bravery or madness, I decided to confront whatever lurked below. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, I made my way to the cellar. The voices grew louder, urging me forward, until I stood before a bricked-up section of the cellar wall that I'd never noticed before. The air here was icy, the whispers now clear enough to discern words, though they were in a language that seemed ancient and forgotten. Driven by a need for answers, I began to remove the bricks one by one. Behind the wall, I found a small room, its existence unknown to my family. In the center lay a book, its pages yellowed with age, bound in leather that seemed to pulse beneath my touch. As I opened the book, the voices fell silent. The pages were filled with writings in the same strange language, alongside sketches that depicted the well and the shadow beneath. One phrase was repeated throughout: guardian of the depths. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The well was not just a well, it was a seal, a barrier keeping something ancient at bay. And the shadow I'd seen was its guardian, or perhaps its prisoner. I felt eyes on me then, watching from the darkness of the room. Turning, I saw it, the shadow beneath. It was formless, yet its presence filled the room with an oppressive dread. It spoke then, in a voice that resonated in my very soul, a plea for release. Terror urged me to flee, but pity rooted me to the spot. This creature, whatever it was, had been trapped here for centuries, alone and forgotten. Was I to be its liberator or its next jailer? The choice was taken from me as the house began to shake, the foundation groaning as if in pain. I understood then that the shadow's imprisonment was tied to the house, to my family. Freeing it might mean destroying everything I'd ever loved. With a heavy heart, I replaced the book and resealed the wall. The whispers turning to screams of rage as I did, I fled the cellar, the house settling into an uneasy silence behind me. I left Willow's End the next day, my grandmother in the care of distant relatives. The whispers followed me in my dreams, a constant reminder of the shadow beneath and the secret I'd left buried. The house still stands, a silent guardian over the well and its prisoner, but every night, when the world is quiet, I can still hear the whispers, calling me back to Willow's End, to the shadow beneath that waits patiently for its next chance at freedom.